At the heart of Switzerland lies some of the loveliest lakeland scenery in the whole of Europe, linked by the panoramic meter gauge railway, the SBB Brünig line, which runs from Interlaken over the Brünig Pass to Luzern. In the first part of our journey, we travelled from the internationally famous resort of Interlaken along the narrow northern shore of Lake Brienz. The lake is home to a fleet of passenger boats, including the old paddle steamer Lurchberg, which make regular connections with the railway. The shoreline is dotted with numerous villages, the most important being Brienz, the woodcarving centre of the region. Brienz is also famous for the steam rack railway, which climbs from here high into the surrounding mountains. Leaving the lake, the line runs along the Aare Valley as far as Meiringen, known throughout the world as the scene of the final confrontation between the legendary detective Sherlock Holmes and the evil Professor Moriarty at the Reichenbach Falls above the village. However, Meiringen has another claim to fame, as its name has become immortalized by the popular confection, the meringue, said to have been invented here in the 17th century. For railway enthusiasts, though, Meiringen's premier attraction lies opposite the station. Here at the SBB depot, all the Swiss Federal Railway's meter gauge repairs and renovations are carried out in the extensive sidings and workshops, as they have been since the opening of the line in 1888. The Swiss are a thrifty nation and were expert at recycling long before the idea was adopted elsewhere. Redundant stock can be modified here before either being sold on to other companies or refurbished to prolong their working life. Locomotive 915, rammed by a runaway lorry, awaits an extensive rebuilding program before returning to active service. Coaches are also built and repaired here, and the depot deals with all stages of the work. When completed, they'll be repainted in the new red livery, which is replacing the original green on both rolling stock and locomotives. Meiringen is home to the Hilfwagen, a mobile troubleshooting vehicle which is on permanent standby to deal with any emergency on the line, should it arise. However, we foresee no trouble, as our new locomotive is coupled up and various safety checks carried out before we set off on the next part of our journey. The line has to climb steeply from Meiringen up to the summit station at Brünig Hasliberg, and rack and pinion will assist our ascent. Our swift passage along the level valley floor is short-lived, for just outside Meiringen the driver has to slow down almost to a walking pace in order to allow both locomotive and coaches to engage with the first part of the rack section. The A initial marks the start of the rack, Anfangen being the German for beginning. The Husenbach viaduct, which carries the track at an acute angle over the riverbed, is one of 3 35-metre-long single-span girder bridges found on this section of the line. The track clings tenaciously to the rock face as we climb up the side of the Hasli Valley. We must gain 400 meters in height before reaching Brünig Hasliberg at the top of the ridge, with our gradient on this section of the climb averaging almost 1 in 8. The Brünig line uses the Riggenbach ladder rack system to tackle the steepest parts of the journey. About 12% of our route is rack assisted. This was the first cogwheel railway built over a Swiss mountain pass on a through line. Brünig-Hasliberg station is one of the scheduled passing places on the line, and the train from Luzern is waiting for us to arrive. The station was just as busy in the early days of steam, when the trains were hauled along this section by the small, lightly powered HG22 rack locomotives, some of which were in service up to the First World War. These were subsequently replaced by more powerful engines, and of these, Loco 1067 is still in running order and makes special appearances to delight all lovers of steam locomotives. She was built by SLM in 1910 and lovingly restored in 1984. She uses the Winterthur compound rack system, with the cogwheel being driven through a gear train from a completely separate set of cylinders mounted above those driving the wheels. These 2 independent sets of cylinders can be linked either in simple or compound expansion modes. Steam locomotives require lengthy preparation time, and work must begin a good 3 hours before 1067 has to depart. 4 dedicated railwaymen undertake a labour of love to get this magnificent old engine into pristine condition for her appearance. Zweiluchinen station on the BOB line becomes a hive of activity as every inch of the locomotive is cleaned and oiled. The old oil lamps must be filled and hung. One of these was originally the property of the Rheinischen Railway Company of southeastern Switzerland. To comply with railway regulations, the wick must be lit before the journey can begin. appearance of a Schienigerplatte train means that 1067 is approaching journey's end at Wilderswil station, where she will collect a private party for a special outing. A sister HG33 locomotive is now a static exhibit at Meiringen station. Before she was pensioned off in 1965, number 1068 took pride of place at the head of the 75th anniversary train on a special run from Meiringen to Brünig Hasliberg. Entering fully into the spirit of the occasion, suitably costumed passengers crowded into her two old coaches. The steep gradients did not present a problem, but like a stately grandmother, she moved at a sufficiently leisurely pace for an energetic grandson to catch up with her. We now continue from the summit station down to the lakes of Lungern and Sarnen. Engaging the rack once again, it now acts as a brake, giving us a leisurely downhill ride through the lush green countryside. The tunnel and station at Capelli take their name from the little 16th century mountain chapel perched on the hillside above the track. We've now dropped 250 meters in height since leaving Brünig Hasliberg station and completed the first part of our descent. For a time, the way will be running along the level Lungern Valley, so we can leave this section of the rack behind. The blue waters of Lake Lungern today look sparkling and placid. However, this is not always the case. In 1887, after a great thunderstorm, the 13th century church was washed away, leaving only the tower standing. The villagers built their new place of worship on higher ground at the other end of the village, modeling it on the basilica at Lourdes in France. The Choren Tunnel, at only 44 meters, is the shortest on this stretch of the line, less than half the length of our train. The 200-meter drop at the end of the valley to the plain below creates benefits and difficulties. Together with Lungern Lake, it has formed part of a hydroelectric scheme since the 1920s. But for travelers, it would have meant a hazardous descent, were it not for the hairpin bends on the pass road to make driving safer, or the rack assistance on the railway to keep our train speed in check. The formation of the Alps has only occurred quite recently in the history of the Earth, so the landscape of Switzerland is constantly evolving. The large scar on the mountainside was caused in September 1986, when a 300-meter wide section of the hillside crashed down on the railway and road below. Fortunately, the nearest train was at Lungern, and there were no fatalities on the line, although it was over 3 months before trains could again reach Luzern. Our train's descent down the rack section is strictly limited to 25 kilometers per hour and is controlled by both air brakes on the carriages and regenerative braking on the locomotive. A third mechanical brake will automatically come into action should our speed inadvertently exceed the limit. Giswil station marks the end of the rack section of our line. From here we have only to descend another 50 metres during the remaining 30 kilometres of our journey. Besides being a scheduled passing place for the through service, Giswil is also the terminus of the local from Luzern. The gentle gradients along this section of the line mean that one of the original electric engines can be used to haul these trains. The locomotive from Luzern is hauling two of the SBB's latest acquisitions, the Jas wagon and the Brünig bar, where travellers can enjoy light refreshments in comfortable surroundings. Our train leaves promptly to speed us along the next stage of the journey. The station at Saxelen can be a busy place, with people arriving from all parts of the world to visit the nearby shrine of Switzerland's own saint, Nicholas of Flue, better known as Bruder Klaus. And it's just as busy today as it was in the 1940s, when this pilgrimage took place. St. Nicholas was not a great martyr or a powerful bishop, but in typically Swiss fashion, a humble farmer who spent the first 50 years of his life in the small mountain village of Flueli, first at his parents' home, and then in the house he shared with his wife and 10 children. Following a vision, he settled in a nearby valley, where his reputation for holiness and wisdom spread throughout Europe. The simplicity of his life contrasts with his splendid tomb at Saxelen Church, where this most human of saints attracts many visitors every year. The town of Sarnen, capital of the half-canton of Obwalden, is not just the political hub of the region, but an important religious centre as well. When the Reformation swept across Switzerland, this area remained staunchly Roman Catholic, although the churches in the town date from long after that period. St. Peter's Church, built in 1742, is a magnificent example of baroque architecture. Democracy in Sarnen has been firmly rooted for centuries, and its canton was one of the three original groups which formed the Swiss Confederation in 1291. The traditional open-air parliament, the Landsgemeinde, seen here some 50 years ago, has been meeting continually since the 14th century. Every April, the adult citizens of the canton vote on many local political matters by a show of hands. The Landenberg, where it takes place, was originally the site of a castle held by the hated Austrian overlords, which was destroyed during a revolt in the early 14th century. The graceful 18th century armory buildings now have a more peaceful purpose as a cultural centre, with a rooftop view of the town. After Sarnen, the line continues down the valley to pass beside the waters of the western arm of Lake Luzern. Sarnen is not merely a picturesque historic settlement, but also has a thriving light industrial complex, providing a great deal of employment for the region. Along this level section of the line, the four motors of our 2,500 horsepower locomotive can easily haul our train at speeds of up to 100 kilometers per hour. Today's Brünig express trains pass swiftly through Alpnachstad station without stopping. However, this was the terminus of the line for the first year of its operation. Passengers then had to take to the water and sail down the western arm of the lake to Luzern by one of the paddle steamers, the predecessors of today's motorcraft. Alpnachstad's main attraction is the Pilatus Cog Railway. Founded in 1889, it's the steepest rack line in Switzerland, working on gradients of almost 1 in 2 at times. It climbs from the lake shore up over 1,600 meters to the summit of Mount Pilatus. Trains stabled in the sidings are brought into service via a modern motorized traverser found at the base station. Today's red trains replaced the earlier yellow steam-driven models in the 1930s. Of the several types of rack systems used in Switzerland, the Pilatus Railway, because of its extreme steepness, is unique in using the Locher method, where a horizontal toothed rack is gripped by 2 adjacent wheels, whose lower lips prevent disengagement. The ABD system, used for example on the Brienz-Rothorn Railway, consists of 1, 2, or sometimes 3 rows of staggered vertically toothed racks, which are engaged by corresponding toothed cogwheels under the locomotive. This method can utilize points at junctions. The Riggenbach system used on the Brünig line has a high-sided ladder rack, which is engaged by a single toothed wheel under both locomotives and carriages. The final leg of our journey lies along the western shore of Lake Luzern. This stretch of water is more properly known as the Vierwaldstättersee, or Lake of the Four Forest Cantons. The section near Alkmaarstad is practically self-contained, with only a very narrow opening at Stans allowing boats into the main lake. The Loppe Tunnel, at 1,186 meters, the longest on the whole line, runs through the heart of the mountain straight into the station at Hergeswil. This is a busy junction. One of the waiting trains is from the Luzern Stans Engelberg company. The Engelberg trains ended at Stanstad for over 65 years, but with the building of a second Loppe Tunnel in 1964, the connection to Hergeswil became possible. From here, the two companies share the track to Luzern. On the outskirts of Luzern, our meter gauge line is joined by the standard gauge tracks which link the factories of this area to the main Swiss rail network. These combine to form a dual gauge section for the rest of the journey, the standard gauge straddling the meter gauge. Our 74-kilometer journey from Interlaken culminates at the busy international terminus at Luzern in a train spotter's paradise, with both standard and meter gauge platforms and sidings and locomotives from various private companies as well as the Swiss Federal Railway. The station is a spacious, modern structure made light and airy by the lavish use of glass and steel. The old building was destroyed in 1971 by a fierce fire, and rebuilding has taken place gradually, with some sections being completed as recently as 1991. Of the original station, only the entrance remains, now a freestanding arch situated in a pleasant square outside the new station. The structure with which Luzern is probably most commonly associated is the covered chapel bridge, a tranquil venue for a talented harpist to display her skills. The wooden bridge, built in 1332, stretches 170 meters across the waters of the River Reuss. Its roof contains over 100 17th century paintings depicting scenes from Luzern's history. The bridge is just one of many beautiful landmarks to be found on a stroll around the town's picturesque old quarter. Luzern has many photogenic sites, one of which is the famous Dying Lion Monument, a remarkable sculpture hewn directly out of a natural sandstone cliff. It was carved in 1821 in tribute to the Swiss soldiers who died in Paris defending King Louis XVI and Queen Marie Antoinette during the French Revolution. Monuments of a different kind are to be found on the outskirts of the city at the Swiss National Transport Museum. Here, since 1959, an extensive collection of exhibits has been assembled. The railway section is a treasure trove of interesting items, including a replica of Switzerland's first train. The oldest original locomotive in the museum is number 28, built in 1858, whose distinctive spark-arresting chimney was typical of the period. Loco 3 from the Emmental Railway is in a splendid state of preservation. She dates from 1881 and is highly unusual in having extended reach rods on her Walschatz valve gear. Number 11, a tank locomotive of the same era from the Gotthard Railway, was designed for light duties, while another contemporary exhibit from the same line, this magnificent steam snowplow, undertook the heavy task of clearing winter snowfalls during its 85 years of service. Another giant, SBB number 2965, measures almost 4.5 meters from wheelbase to chimney top. Early electric locomotives are also found here. BTB number 2 from 1899, one of the first electric engines in Europe, has twin pantographs and uses a three-phase power source, the third phase coming from the track. The meter-gauge Rhaetian Railway is well represented. Loco 207 was brought into service in 1913 to work on the Lower Engadine route. Now, with its side open to reveal the interior, the Derry drive motor can be clearly seen. This is also the home of one of the Rhaetian Railway's most loved locomotives, the Baby Crocodile. 5 of her sisters still remain in active service. Model railway enthusiasts are not neglected either, with a superb working layout of the Gotthard line giving a chance to travel along part of this spectacular route in miniature. Looking at first glance like a cardboard model is the third Brünig line HG33 locomotive remaining in Switzerland, number 1063, dating from 1909. Opened up to show its internal workings, individual components are highlighted by different colors. The cab is still intact, its controls gleaming. There's not a speck of coal dust in sight. A full complement of oil cans stand at the ready, reflections of former glorious days in action through the heart of Switzerland. Whether it be with the steam of yesterday or the comfort of today, a journey along the SBB Brünig line can satisfy every taste.